What's going on, guys? Tower number 9 here, and today we have a giant new preview drop from Fantasy Flight Games. They did a live stream where they went over all the cards from the two-player starter from the upcoming Shadows of the Galaxy set. So I'm going to get into the cards that we saw in that preview that were not shown previously. Let's take a look and see what we can see. First up, we have the Clan Ren Rescuer. This is a common card. It is a 2-cost 1/2 with the Mandalorian and Trooper traits. That is Vigilance Heroism, and when played, you give an experience token to a unit. So this is an interesting card. I think overall this is going to be something that will probably see a fair deal of play. It is not restricted by traits like the Wing Leader or TIE Advanced, which could only target Rebels or Imperials, respectively. And it doesn't say another unit, so it can buff itself to get a 2-cost 2/3. 2-cost 2/3 is on curve that you're hoping to have something that does a little bit more than that. Overall, I think that this is an interesting card. The traits here are pretty relevant. Mandalorian in particular seems like it has a lot of synergies, and there are a few Trooper synergies as well. It's not very flashy. This isn't a card that's going to be super exciting, but I think it's going to be at least decent in many cases. I think it's solid at least for limited, and I think that one important note about this is that it can buff your leader, which is always nice to have. Doesn't require a certain trait. You don't have to be a Mandalorian to be buffed here. And additionally, if you play this unit to buff something and then leave it on the board as a relatively weaker unit, it does protect against Power of the Dark Side. Overall, I think there's a fair amount of value here, and I think this card will see play at least in limited and perhaps in constructed as well. We'll have to see whether the versatility there is worth the inefficiency when played on its own or the relatively small effect for a card. All right, next up we have the Hawk 290 Freighter. This is a common unit. It is a 3-cost 2/5 space unit with the Vigilance aspect, and it is totally vanilla. So 2/5 is better stats for cost than many units at this price, but the stat distribution isn't really optimal. So ideally you'd get 3 power because 3 is an important breakpoint in space. So at 3 power you would be able to defeat units like the Green Squadron A-Wing or Alliance X-Wing in one attack. At 2 power you're not quite there. I do think that this is a card that will likely benefit a lot from upgrades for this reason. If you can give it even just 1 experience, maybe with that Clan Ren Rescuer that we just showed, it suddenly becomes a lot more threatening to common space units. Overall, I think this is not a super exciting card, but it's not terrible either. The stats for cost are actually pretty good. There are a lot of units that might be like a 3/3 in space for 3 or similar, so having 7 points of stats is good. I just do wish it had that 3rd point of power. I think it will likely see play at least in limited. It might be good also if we see a different like stat meta. So what I mean by that is right now the 3 is an important breakpoint to have for your power in space. Maybe in the future we're going to see a lot of 3/2 space units, like maybe disabling Fang Fighter is going to be super common, and other units with that exact stat profile. If that were the case, the Hawk 290 here would be more desirable because it can combat that profile a little more efficiently than some of the others. Next up, we have the Survivor's Gauntlet. This is a 5-cost 4/6 space unit. It has the Mandalorian vehicle and transport traits. When played and on attack, you may attach an upgrade on a unit to another eligible unit controlled by the same player. So these are really good stats for the price. 5 for a 4/6 in space is great. Additionally, it allows you to rearrange and upgrade both when played and on attack. And this can be used on either player's upgrades. There's a lot of versatility there. Overall, I think this is actually a really strong card. It's potentially a hard counter to Traitorous because you can, if your opponent plays a Traitorous on one of your units, you can play the Survivor's Gauntlet, take the Traitorous that they had on your unit, move it onto one of their units, which means that now it's no longer attached to your unit and your unit gets to go back to your side. And you've just negated Traitorous for the same cost as it, and you now have a 4/6 ship, and you can potentially do other stuff. You can potentially move buffs off an opposing unit to defeat it. So as an example of that, if the opponent had a unit that had Academy training on it for +2/+2, and it was being kept alive by that Academy training, you could take the Academy training and move it to a different enemy unit to defeat the first one. You could transfer your own upgrades between units. So let's say you have an Academy training on one of your ships, and you swing in and do some good damage. Then you can play this, move that Academy training onto a different unit, and swing with that. It will get the benefit of the upgrade as well. I do think it's a bit situational because it does require another eligible unit controlled by the same player. So the play that I was talking about earlier where you would like move that Traitorous to counter it, it would require the opponent having a unit that had 3 or less cost for you to move the traitors onto. But overall, I think this looks very strong if upgrades are big. The stats are pretty good for the price, and the ability can potentially do a lot. And there are a lot of like little tricky uses for it as well. Overall, I'm pretty impressed by this card, and I think it could end up being quite strong. All right, next up we have Public Enemy. This is a common. It is another zero-cost bounty upgrade, and this time it gives a shield token when the attached unit is defeated or captured. So like other zero-cost bounties, it synergizes with the Mandalorian. The Mandalorian can exhaust an opposing unit when it can exhaust an opposing unit when you play an upgrade. It has to be a unit of a certain cost or less, but yeah. And it does rely on you having a good unit to receive this shield, because like getting a shield token can be really good in the right scenario, but the problem is, like, what if you attack with a unit that trades with their unit and you don't have another unit to give a shield? Well, you just wasted the bounty. What if you can give a shield to a unit that doesn't really need it? You know, again, not all that effective. Like other bounty upgrades, it can also be disrupted or removed. On the other hand, it doesn't say non-leader unit. You could use this to potentially put a shield on your leader. That could be especially good if you're capturing. So the way the capture mechanic works, if you capture an enemy unit, it's out of play, and when your unit that captured it is defeated, they get their unit back. So you can put Public Enemy on an enemy unit, then capture it, and then use the bounty to give a shield to the unit that you just captured with, making it more difficult for the opponent to defeat your unit and free their units. That's a nice little synergy there. It overall looks pretty solid in its role. It'll need some testing to confirm that this is good, but if you can shield the Mandalorian with it, or another leader, or shield someone when they take a captive, I think this could be very strong. Next up, we're going to take a look at Foundling. This is a 1-cost +1/+1 upgrade that also grants the Mandalorian trait to the attached unit. I think this is useful as a small buff. It also enables trait synergies. So, you know, if you have other stuff that benefits Mandalorians, then this is appealing, and I think it's potentially more appealing than other like +1/+1 and small benefit upgrades. But the problem with it is that it does require you to be running that other Mandalorian stuff. So in limited right now, like Infiltrator Skill, which is a 1-cost upgrade that gives +1/+1 and Saboteur, is it's not a great card, but it's a playable card. And Foundling, I don't think is going to be easy to just put into a build as Infiltrator Skill, because Foundling requires you to already be running Mandalorian trait synergy to get max value there. I'm not sure that's going to be worth it, and I'm not sure that's going to be reliable in limited play. In a Mandalorian deck, this is a really good card. Not that you would want to play it on the Mandalorian, but in that deck, you could be running a bunch of Mandalorian synergies that work with your leader as well as other units, and then you play Foundling to buff one of your units that doesn't have the Mandalorian trait, make it eligible for the synergies, and exhaust an opposing unit. Overall seems good. Worst case scenario, I think you could actually play it on the Mandalorian himself just for stats. So, you know, stats and exhaust, I suppose. Overall, I think this is going to be pretty solid. Next up, we have Mandalorian Armor. This is a rare, and I think this card is going to be interesting. So it is a 2-cost upgrade that gives +1/+3. This is probably worse than the standard 2-cost +2/+2 for an upgrade, but it does give a shield token to the attached unit if it is a Mandalorian. It can make a Mandalorian leader very annoying to remove. We've seen 2 Mandalorian leaders so far, so that has been the Mandalorian himself and Bo-Katan both have that Mandalorian trait. So if you play this on one of them, they suddenly become very hard to kill and they gain a shield. If you play it on a smaller Mandalorian unit, it does give them a big buff and a shield, but it does seem to leave them vulnerable to bounce or to hard removal cards that just defeat a target directly. I'm most fond of this on the leader as a result of that. But it still does work with other trait synergy. It's not entirely reliant on playing it on your leader. And if we do see units in the future that have resistance to removal, that would help a lot. So there are things in Magic the Gathering, for instance, that have abilities that make it so they can't be targeted by a certain effect. So essentially the equivalent would be, what if there was some unit that was a Mandalorian unit that said this unit cannot be targeted by opposing events, or whatever the term would be that would make that function in the context of this game. I think that would potentially be a great target for this, because then if the opponent is going to have to resort to unit combat to clear your unit, and now you're playing stuff that makes that unit much more difficult to clear, that could be good. Will we see something like that? I'm not sure. You know, time will tell. Next up, we have the Vambrace Grapple Shot. This is a 2-cost +2/+2 upgrade. It is in the Vigilance aspect and attached to a non-vehicle unit. Attached unit gains on attack, exhaust the defender. So 2-cost +2/+2, fairly standard stats for cost. Allows you to exhaust the defender when you attack. Honestly, that ability is not very good a lot of the time. I'm not saying that to be a hater, but you tend to want to defeat units you attack, not just exhaust them. Especially when you're having a unit that's buffed with bonus stats, ideally you're just clearing units that you're attacking into. Now, one thing I will say about it, though, is that this synergizes well with Boba Disintegrator because he has his on-attack ability that gets bonus damage against someone who's exhausted and didn't come into play this turn. And so you can equip this to him, use that to exhaust them, and then hit them with the on-attack ability. So that could be pretty solid. And it might also do well if we see other cards that have this kind of punish exhausted unit type theme, where they're going to get a bonus against exhausted defenders. But even if you don't get much value out of the on-attack ability, 2 for +2/+2 is still a solid rate, so it's not exactly bad even then, and I think this card will probably see some play. You do also potentially get that nice benefit where you put this on a cheap unit and you manage to exhaust something big and powerful, which is kind of cool. Next up, we have Fel the Dragon. This is a 4-cost event in Vigilance. Defeat a non-leader unit with 5 or more power. It is an uncommon. This is, I think, a very strong card, and I think is going to see widespread play. So it is a 4-cost removal that only works on units with 5 or more power. It is hard removal, so it goes through shields, it goes through damage reduction. And for mini decks, I think this is basically just going to be a better version of Vanquish and will replace Vanquish. Vanquish is already suboptimal except against big targets most of the time, just because it costs so much. And most of the efficient Vanquish targets are things that you can hit with this as well. You do lose some flexibility in exchange for this costing 1 less, but I think this costing 1 less than Vanquish is going to be good enough that I think this is going to be commonly played. I could be wrong. I could be way off base. Maybe Vanquish is going to remain strong, but I think this is going to be a solid card in draft, and especially to have against the kind of higher end cards in your opponent's build. And I think that in constructed play, I expect to see this a lot. We'll have to see if that pans out, but I would not be surprised at all if this is a commonly used card in constructed play. Next up, we have the Outland Vanguard, a 2-cost 2/1 space unit. When played, you may give an experience token to another unit that costs 3 or less. It has the command villainy traits or the command villainy aspects, and it is Imperial Vehicle and Fighter. So 2 for a 2/1 space unit's below the curve. You can get 2 for a 2/3 space unit with something like the Alliance X-Wing. It does give out an experience, but it unfortunately has to both target another unit and that unit has to cost 3 or less. So that's pretty unfortunate. If you compare this to the Rescuer that we saw earlier, the Rescuer can target itself and can target anything. So the Rescuer basically has a much better version of this ability. Now, to be fair, 2/1 in space is a better stat line than 1/2 on the ground. Maybe that's going to make up a bit for the ability not being as good, but it kind of feels like one of those Wing Leader versus TIE Advanced type scenarios where the heroic version seems substantially better than the villainy version. It's not totally awful. It's kind of like a small Wing Leader. It might be best in conjunction with a 1-drop on turn 2, so you have 3 resources, you play a 1-drop and you play this, either buffing that 1-drop or whatever you played on turn 1. And I do think it could also work well for Tarkin, because Tarkin can play this on turn 2, buff whatever he played early, and then potentially spend his remaining resource to buff this or buff the other one. Similarly, with something like Vader, you could use that ping ability with it maybe. But overall, I'm not that impressed. It kind of feels like a worse version of that Rescuer that we saw in the Heroism build. Next up, we have Remnant Reserves. This is a 4-cost uncommon event. It is a command villainy one. Search the top 5 cards of your deck for up to 3 units, reveal them and draw them, put the other cards in the bottom of your deck in a random order. This is a 4-cost search that draws up to 3 units from your top 5 cards. It's a small search depth for a card that needs to find 3 targets for maximum value, but units are going to be very common in most builds. A lot of builds are running, 60% of their deck or more as units, so your hit chance is probably going to be relatively high, and it can help Moff Gideon refill small units, which he does synergize with. I do think card draw is kind of weak in this game overall. Even if you want this, I'm not sure that you want it over, say, Grand Moff Tarkin, the unit. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure it'll be worthwhile. If you do have a lot of units, then potentially drawing 3 of them is nice, but I'm not thrilled by it, to be honest with you. We'll have to see how it goes. All right, next up we have the Warzone Lieutenant, 1-cost 2/2 common ground unit. It is totally vanilla. It has the command aspect and the trooper trait. So 1 cost 2/2 vanilla, not a lot to say here. The stats are on curve. Other units at this price have abilities though. So the Spec Force Soldier has a very good ability and is a 1 cost 2/2 ground unit. Overall, this seems pretty weak. It might fill a role. Doesn't have the Imperial trait despite the art, which limits its overall synergies. It might work better with Gideon because he could use his ability to try and trade this up for a more valuable unit, and it does only cost 1. That is worse off initiative, which hurts for a 1-cost unit because it's only going to be efficient if you're taking multiple actions, which means your opponent might have the initiative. I'm really not impressed by this at all. It might do its job in some builds. It is a cheap unit. You can play it on the first turn if need be. But 1 for a 2/2 is a very bad stat line for a first turn play, unless you have another 1 cost to play alongside it, because a lot of units are just going to defeat this and remain alive, especially in limited, where people are more likely to be playing things like 2 cost 2/3s. Yeah, I'm not thrilled with this. I don't think it's total garbage. I think it's a playable card, but I think it's not an exciting card. All right, next up we have the Tyrax Heavy Fighter. I might have pronounced that totally wrong. 4 cost 3/3 space unit in command with Overwhelm. When attacking an enemy unit, deal excess damage to the opponent's base. On attack, you may exhaust another friendly unit. If you do, this unit gets +3/+0 for this attack. Very poor stats for cost. So 4 for a 3/4 space unit is pretty normal. This is 4 for a 3/3 space unit. So that 4 for a 3/4 space unit that your opponent gets can attack and defeat this and remain alive. So that's not great. And Overwhelm and the on-attack ability do let it punch above its weight, but the defense for cost is just so bad that I'm skeptical here. Like, you might play this, and then your opponent plays, they can play a 4 cost 3/4 with Ambush with the Aztec Liberator gunship and just immediately clear you. They could play an Imperial Interceptor and just immediately clear you. There's a lot of space things, even first turn plays that deal 3 damage. Your opponent could just trade with a Green Squadron A-Wing or with Red 3 or something. If this were a 3/4, I would be much more optimistic about it. It does hit really hard with Overwhelm, and its ability can help gain tempo via action compression. So if you exhaust another friendly unit that was only going to deal 3 or less damage anyway, you're essentially gaining tempo by buffing this attack by 3, and then essentially using 2 units at once. There is some solid value there, but I'm not sure that it's enough to make up for the 3 defense at 4 cost when others are getting 4 cost 3/4s, and there's a bunch of stuff that hits for 3. I'm not sure the defense is going to be worth it. I could be totally wrong, but I'm pessimistic about this card. Next up, we have the Discerning Veteran. This is a common. It is a 5 cost 3/4 ground unit. Those are very bad stats for cost. Those stats are worth 3, but when played, this unit captures an enemy non-leader ground unit. So put the captured card face down under this unit until this unit leaves play. When this unit leaves play, the opponent does get their card back, but this is an interesting one. So the bad stats make it really weak if you're not capturing something. And additionally, it means that it might be easy for the opponent to rescue their card. So you play the Discerning Veteran and capture them, they use open fire on you, and now their unit's no longer captured. But it's still easy to at least get a disruptive effect from this unit. Even if it doesn't actually remove the opposing unit for an extended time, at least it can disrupt it. At least it can make them spend their resources on other stuff. I don't know. I think it could prove strong if you can protect this with Sentinel units or similar. It might be problematic for the opponent to try to get rid of it. But I think it has very low value unless making a capture because these stats are very bad for the cost. And if you do make one, it's perhaps solid, but I'm not sure that it's going to be. I don't know. 5 is a lot. I'm not thrilled with it. I don't hate it, but I'm not thrilled with it. It does also have the Bounty Hunter trait, which I think is going to have some relevant synergy, but we'll have to see exactly where that ends up. Next up, we have Legal Authority, a rare card. It is a 2 cost upgrade that gives +2 HP. Attached to a friendly unit. When played, attached unit captures an enemy non-leader unit with less power than it. Put the captured card face down under attached unit until attached unit leaves play. I am much more optimistic about Legal Authority than I am about the previous capture card that I was discussing. The capture effect here only works on targets with less power than your unit, but it can cross arenas. So you could use a space unit to capture a ground unit or vice versa. And the HP bonus helps out here by making it so that your unit is more resilient, which is going to make it harder for your opponent to remove it to get their captured guy back. And this might be especially strong against raid units that have low base power, because even though you are capturing a unit that has less power than your unit, let's say you played a basic 2/3 unit and your opponent played an A-Wing. Now you play Legal Authority, you capture their A-Wing, and now your unit is a 2/5, which is going to be annoying for your opponent to remove. I actually think this is one of the stronger looking capture cards I've seen, and I think it could be really solid. One other note about this is that if you remove Legal Authority, that does not free the captive. They have to actually defeat, they have to get your unit to leave play to get the captive back. When Legal Authority has been used to capture them, you know, it doesn't matter if they later play a Fang Fighter and remove the Authority. It's not like Traitors where it would cause them to get their unit back immediately, unless removing the Legal Authority caused your unit to be defeated because you'd already taken some damage or something. Overall, I think this could be strong early disruption against aggro that really doesn't want to spend time fighting units. The fact that it gives that +2 HP in addition to the capture, I think could be instrumental in making this a card that makes it harder for the opponent to free their captive as well as capturing a unit early on. Overall, I'm pretty optimistic about this card. I think there's a good chance this will see play, but if we do see a lot of anti-capture stuff, there have already been a few cards that cause things to escape directly, then this becomes a lot more dubious. However, it could still be used at the very least as disruption. Next, we have Outflank. This is a 1-cost event. It is in the command aspect, attack with 2 units, 1 at a time. This is basically the same card as Rebel Assault, except that Rebel Assault gives each of the units +1 power, but then Rebel Assault only works on Rebels. I think it could play a similar role as a mirror breaker in aggro matchups. So right now, Rebel Assault is really good in aggro mirrors because it lets you make 2 attacks at once and potentially push damage to your opponent much faster in an aggro race. This one doesn't have those bonus stats that Rebel Assault offers, which makes it less strong, but it also works with decks that don't have a high Rebel density. You can additionally use this not just in a racing scenario, but you could use it to kill a leader in 1 action or similar. Like, let's say your opponent deploys Han Solo, you have 2 units that hit for 3. You could use Outflank and have them each attack into Han to clear him before he attacks and generates a temporary resource, which could be pretty good. Overall, though, Rebel Assault is basically the same thing, but better, and this is the Rebel Assault at home that you play if your deck doesn't have the heroism aspect and or the rebel count for Rebel Assault to work. I think if green-red villain aggro is a thing in particular, this could help them in those aggro mirrors. Moving on, we have Moment of Glory. This is a 3-cost command event. Give a unit +4/+4 for this phase. So the immediate comparison that I see is to Tactical Advantage, which is considered one of the worst cards in the game. Tactical Advantage gives +2/+2. Moment of Glory gives +4/+4. I think this is probably going to work best if you're buffing a big Sentinel unit, because in that sort of situation, you are creating a scenario where the opponent might have to attack into it if they want to make attacks with their units, and that means that the temp HP might absorb some damage and so on. Otherwise, you can just play this to help push more damage, but you're very easily disrupted because playing this is an action, and then the opponent gets an action to try to remove your unit or exhaust it or whatever before you get a chance to make that attack. The extra stats do make you more resistant to removal, which is nice. Like some other buff cards, I think it's probably most reliable on a leader where things like Waylay won't work on it. Overall, though, I'm pretty doubtful that this will see much constructed play. Time will tell, but Tactical Advantage was a big miss. This card does offer more for your card than Tactical Advantage, but it also costs more. I'm not sure that it's going to prove to be worth it. Next up, we have the Incinerator Trooper. This is a special or starter rarity card. It is going to be in the Moff Gideon Two-Player Starter deck and not in packs normally. It is a 2-cost 2/2 with the villainy aspect only. While attacking, this unit deals combat damage before the defender, and it is a ground unit with the Imperial and Trooper traits. So this has the kind of permanent shoot first ability that Han Solo Reluctant Hero has. This ability is extremely strong on Han, but Han has ambush and way better stats. So Han is a 6/6. This is a 2/2. That being said, if you can buff up the Incinerator Trooper, it might be a similar pain to Han. It synergizes with Moff Gideon. It works much better if you're going first in general. You can play this, and a fair number of early ground plays will just get killed by this without striking back. So if you lead off with the Incinerator Trooper and your opponent plays a Viper Probe Droid, you get to attack and defeat their Probe Droid and take no damage. So that's pretty sweet. Overall, I think this isn't like super great base. Like the scenario where you play this and the opponent plays like a 2/3 or a 3/3 or whatever is not, it's not what you want to see. They can even ambush into you with ECL if need be, but if you're going first and you have Moff Gideon to potentially give you that +1 on that attack, maybe you can take out that 2/3 and take no damage in return. So, the upside on this with various synergies, including Moff Gideon's ability, but also just like upgrades and so on, Snow Trooper Lieutenant, things like that. The upside's very high. And so I think this is an exciting card that might well see play even in constructed, depending on what the unit meta ends up being and whether it's going to be possible to make decks that will reliably enough buff this guy to get big value out of that permanent shoot first. All right, next up we have Protector of the Throne, and unfortunately we're going from a unit that I'm very excited about to a unit that I'm very disappointed about. This is a 3-cost 2/4 ground unit. It has the heroism aspect only, and while this unit is upgraded, it gains Sentinel. And that is all it does. It does have the Mandalorian trait. So these are very weak base stats. 2/4 for 3 is not good. You can get a 3/4 for 3. And additionally, the ability is conditional. So there are conditional sentinels that are 3-cost 3/4 that gain Sentinel conditionally. So Emperor's Royal Guard and Homestead Militia are both in that category. This is a conditional Sentinel, but it's only 2/4. So you compare it to the Cloud City Wingguard, which is 3-cost 2/4 unconditional Sentinel, and this just looks really bad. So Protector is basically just a worse Cloud City Wingguard, unless Mandalorian synergy is great. And Mandalorian synergy has to be so good that you're willing to take a large efficiency penalty in running this card instead of something that can just have that Sentinel guaranteed. I'm honestly really unimpressed with this card. It feels like it could have been 2/5 and it would be fine, or even 3/4. And I don't know, maybe the Mandalorian synergy will be worth it overall. Maybe that synergy is going to be so good that you're going to want to run this even though it's not efficient, because you're going to have the Mandalorians and the upgrades to buff up those Mandalorians. But I'm not that optimistic about this, quite frankly. I just think the base stats are so inefficient compared to comparable units that I'm just not very excited about the Protector of the Throne. Next up, we have the Mandalorian Warrior. This is interesting because it's actually a neutral or aspectless card, but it honestly seems kind of good for that. So it's a 3-cost 3/3 ground unit. When played, you may give an experience token to another Mandalorian unit. Now, this isn't setting the world on fire. I think it's only going to be worth it in a Mandalorian synergy deck, but it's not terrible. If it could target itself, it would actually be really good. That's not allowed, and it's probably good that that's not allowed, because this would become a card that I think would be played in a lot of decks, which is not really where you want things like this to be. The neutral cards are kind of supposed to be not that good. So it's probably good that they erred on the side of caution and made it so that it only buffs another Mandalorian. If you could just play this as a 3-cost 4/4, it would be sick. Still, it can do a decent job. You get a 3/3 and you get a buff on another Mandalorian. That's not bad at all. It can enable the when upgraded synergies that we've already seen some other Mandalorian units have. And if you have a Mandalorian leader, it could just be another buff there. So, let's say you're playing Sabine. Sabine's a Mandalorian. Play the Mandalorian Warrior. Give Sabine a +1/+1. That's pretty good. And develop another unit. Yeah, it's not terrible at all. Would you rather play a wing leader and give Sabine +2/+2? Yeah, probably. But like the unit that you get for fighting afterwards with the Mandalorian Warrior is a lot better than the wing leader. And if you leave Sabine at power 3, you can still ready her with keep fighting or aggression. I don't know. I don't think this card's a joke. It's a neutral card, and neutrals are not really supposed to be good, but this is not that bad. Like, I could conceivably see people using this in constructed. I'm not sure that they will, but I think for limited, if you can get other Mandalorians in your deck, this is definitely passable, and it might even see constructed play. We'll have to see. And then we have Rich Reward. This is a 1-cost upgrade, and the attached unit gains bounty, give an experience token to each of up to 2 units. So you can potentially buff 2 different friendly units, or if you only have 1, you can just give 1 experience to that unit. You don't get to give out 2 experience to the same unit. It seems strong for the Mandalorian, where you can play this in Exhaust. I'm not sure how it stacks up to the other bounty effects. Experience can often help cross a breakpoint. So if you can, let's say that you both have a 3/3 and you give yours +1/+1, and now you can attack and defeat theirs, and theirs cannot attack and defeat you. Could be really good. The main problem is you need 2 units that benefit there, and 1 for that. And a more conditional scenario, I don't know. I might rather just play the 0-cost one that gives a shield to 1 unit. That seems like it might be better. I don't know for sure. Maybe Rich Reward will be good. We'll have to see. I think if you have multiple small units and you get to buff them up, that's certainly a nice thing to do. But a lot of those decks tend to be more oriented on aggro and attacking the base, and less interested in playing a bounty on an opponent's unit and going after removing units. Could be cool for Moff Gideon though. Play multiple small units, put the Rich Reward on something, potentially use his ability to give yourself a little buff, clear that out, buff up your units a bit. Yeah, I don't know. Doesn't seem terrible. Doesn't seem terrible. Doesn't seem amazing either. Not sure it will see play compared to the zero cost bounties that also offer small effects. But it is also neutral, so it goes in any deck. If you need more bounty enablers, this is always there for you. Could end up being cool. We'll have to see. All right, what do you think about these cards? Are these bounties worth the risk? Are they not worth it? Do you think that playing these sorts of cards that are putting bounties on your opponent's stuff and then trying to clear them for a big reward, is that going to be worthwhile, or is that something you don't want to do? Same question for capture. Is capture worth the risk? Is it worth doing these effects that can potentially take the opponent out for a long time, but if they clear your unit, they get theirs back? What do you guys think? I'm excited to see how this set's progressing. I think there are some very interesting new mechanics here, and yeah, I'm kind of looking forward to playing with the Mandalorian. I'm not as positive on Moff Gideon, but with some of these previews, I don't know, like that Flamer Trooper and stuff. I'm starting to see ways in which I think Moff Gideon. I'm starting to see things that are designed where his ability could be getting some good value. I'm still kind of pessimistic on him compared to Tarkin. I'm not going to lie, but there's some interesting stuff there. What do you guys think? What are your favorites? What are your least favorites? Do you agree with me that some cards are exciting and others not? Be sure to let me know in the comments below. And that's going to do it for this one, guys. Thanks to y'all for watching, and we will be back later with some more Star Wars Unlimited content. I will catch you guys later.